Chapter 31-40 Cathulhu Online, Munya. Chapter 31 Cat Dad's Serious Dungeon Raid, 1. Cathulhu Essence Core, you said. Tang Yuan narrowed his eyes. Cathulhu Essence Core was a jewel-like crystallized monster blood, which could be found from an extremely dangerous alien monster, aka Cathulhu. This monster didn't exist in this world, but it would appear in the Constellation Age chapter, which happened after the invasion of cultivators and Heavenly Deo Patch. Cathulhus were galactic-class boss monsters, who indiscriminately every hunted player and NPC they found. They were known to be the agents of calamities and planet eaters because of their massive size and their menacing appearance. However, some of the crystallized blood was left behind in this third game world, and the local NPCs treated them as precious jewels. None of them was aware of their usage yet, but Xiao Mao needed them for his future evolution. Yes, Munya. Do you have one? I'll buy it as well, Munya. May I ask what you're going to do with it? Xiao Mao's expression turned solemn. He lied, I'm a collector. I collect rare objects, Munya. Coincidentally, I heard a rumor about this precious jewel, and I want one for my collection, Munya. I see. I see, Tang Yuan beamed Xiao Mao with a bright smile. Currently, our branch has no Cathulhu Essence Core, but I remember that the main branch has one in the warehouse. Would you like to place a commission for the item? How much, Munya? It's a lot cheaper than the ship. Only 1 million gold coins per gram. Get me 10 grams, Munya. Xiao Mao placed 10 tokens of pact on the tea table. He was never stingy when he invested in his future growth. Tang Yuan collected the token and signed another commission contract with him. The core will be directly delivered to your premium warehouse within a month. You can keep the contract as proof of commission, sir. Xiao Mao collected the papers and put them in his premium inventory slot. That will be all for the day. Thanks for businesses, Munya. Thank you, too. I shall escort you out. Slave 1 and Xiao Mao left the Merchant Guild building, which was a luxurious mansion in the middle of the residential district. They headed back to the players' marketplace next. They reached the crowded plaza, where the auction house marketplace NPC had been sitting there. 100 shops lined up nicely on the roadsides. Stalls of NPC and players blended in, and nobody could differentiate them apart. Xiao Mao didn't bother setting a stall. He went straight to the auction house NPC and deposited all boots and the remaining set of hyena equipment. Then, he set the price to 1 pact each. As for the cards, Xiao Mao didn't sell them. He kept it to himself for now, hiding the clues of the Knoll Island. While Xiao Mao was at it, he searched for a better weapon for a character level 10 and above. He filtered the search and added a few keywords. A new panel appeared in front of Xiao Mao, showing the list of available equipment that other players had put on sale. Most of them were guns, bows, crossbows, and range weapons. It didn't take long for Xiao Mao to pick a few weapons from the list. Old hunting crossbow, common. This old wooden crossbow once belonged to a goblin crossbowman, but it's too worn out to be useful. Novice archers and crossbowmen might find it hard to use as it requires some strength to fully utilize it due to its strong crossbow strings. Item type, weapon. Effect, ATK 10. Requirement, level 10, 20 STR, 30 dex. Durability, 100/100. The attack power of the crossbow was the same as Fuyo Cleaver. However, it cost only 500 gold coins as it was a common weapon, which could be found in popular goblin dungeons. Xiao Mao purchased 10 of them right away as he prepared for a long intensive hunt. He also purchased crossbow bolts. Rough crossbow bolt. This crossbow bolt can be used on any crossbow. It's light, but the lance-like arrowhead is not that sharp as it was roughly made by an amateur fletcher. Item type, ammunition. Effect, ATK +2. Requirement, none. Rough crossbow bolts were also cheap. 10 of them were sold for 1 gold coin, so many archers used them as their primary ammunition. Xiao Mao also purchased 10,000 of them at once since it only occupied only 1 slot of inventory. However, he bought more types of bolts. Explosive crossbow bolt. This crossbow bolt comes with an attached mini TNT. Once this bolt hit a target, the bolt will explode and deal AoE damage in a radius of 3 meters. Item type, ammunition. Effect, ATK plus 15, AoE. Requirement, Dex 30. Barbed crossbow bolt. This bolt's arrowhead is refined by an adept hunter. As the arrowhead comes with barbed parts, victims of this type of arrow may suffer a bleeding status effect if they recklessly remove the arrowheads from their skins. Item type, ammunition. Effect, ATK plus 5, inflict bleed status effect. Requirement, Dex 15. The 2 types of ammo were cheap as well, but it was more costly than the staple rough bolts. Each of them cost 1 gold coin. Xiao Mao didn't fret. He purchased 10,000 for each type. Then, he restocked some healing potions and mana potions. He checked his character's money in his game account. A bit over 10,000 gold coins and 7,101 packs remained. Seeing his crypto tokens decrease from 33,000-ish packs to 7,101 saddened him, but it was a necessary investment for his game character and his real body's transformation. Once the shopping was done, the 2 of them returned to their ship, which had been parked at the shipyard to recharge its motor engine. When they got there, the shipyard clerk came to report. "It's fully charged and repaired, 5,000 gold coins, please." The maintenance was cheap. Xiao Mao paid the bill and passed all his available gold coins to Slave 1 as extra pocket money. They sailed back to Knoll Island. This time, they would seriously grind for levels and items. After returning to the Knoll dungeon, Xiao Mao gave the walk shield to Slave 1 and ordered him to kill every knoll he found. "Go ahead and kill everything on sight, Munya. I'll support you, Munya." Xiao Mao brought out his crossbow and loaded it with a rough bolt. He hopped down from Slave 1's shoulder and rushed toward the first squad of gnolls. Currently, 2 elite gnolls and 18 minions had been patrolling the cave. When they saw Xiao Mao and Slave 1, they howled and charged at them. Slave 1 expressionlessly charged forward and swung his club at the first oncoming gnoll. Bonk! It was a direct hit to the gnoll's unprotected head. 250. Unlike Xiao Mao's cleaver, the hyene club was a blunt weapon, and the weapon was a longer reach than the short-ranged cleaver. However, the damage range was unpredictable as it depended on the point of impact, momentum, and attributes of the attacker. Still, dealing over 200 damage was enough to one-shot the first gnoll. It vanished, and loot items entered Slave 1's inventory. Whoosh! Suek! A crossbow bolt whizzed and pierced into the eye of another gnoll. Headshot critical. 435. The second gnoll dissipated into thin air. While Slave 1 charged forward, Xiao Mao had positioned himself on a large boulder next to a wall. His 8 tentacles systematically moved and reloaded a new bolt. The 3 front arms stabilized and aimed the crossbow while his third tentacle coiled around the trigger. It took 1 second for Xiao Mao to reload and fire. Whoosh! Poek! Another bolt penetrated the head of the gnoll, but it failed to puncture through its skull. 195. No critical. It failed to kill it in one shot. Slave 1 glanced at the injured gnoll. He smashed the elite gnoll with his club while he bashed the injured gnoll with the wok. Dong! 20. The injured gnoll dissipated into sparkling lights. Roar! While Xiao Mao and Slave 1 were on the offensive, the gang of gnolls counterattacked as well. They bit and clawed on Slave 1. 1. Unfortunately for them, Slave 1's defense was high enough to negate most damages. Moreover, Slave 1's level was similar to the monster's, so he didn't suffer from the level penalty. Growl! On the other hand, the elite Knoll's attack power was different. It swung its club at Slave 1. Slave 1 failed to block it. The club landed on his skull helmet. 12. It was weak, but the Knoll gang surrounded Slave 1 and hit him from all sides. The small numbers added up over time, and Slave 1's HP bar decreased by 10% within a few seconds after the fight had started. Slave 1 also fought back, but his speed was much slower than the Knoll's. Poek. The one behind the Knoll got hit by a bolt to the head. It disintegrated into dust. Slave 1, break through the encirclement and run toward the exit, Munya. Slave 1 turned around and ran. He got out of the encirclement in an instant. Xiao Mao loaded an explosive bolt and fired at the center of the Knoll squad right away. Boom! The bolt exploded upon impact. Various numbers appeared on top of a dozen Knoll's heads and sent them flying. The explosive damage ranged between 100 to 250 points. A few died, but the rest of their HP bars were left with less than 50%. As for the elites, the explosion only reduced 10% of their HP. The 2 elite Knolls and a dozen Knolls fell to the ground and struggled to get up. Orbits of stars appeared, being stunned by the explosion and noise. Slave 1, come back and finish them, Munya. Slave 1 U-turned. Although Xiao Mao didn't order him to use a skill, he pointed his finger at the furthest Knoll. Water bullet. Poek. A water droplet appeared out of nowhere and punctured the injured Knoll's head. 112. A blue number appeared and decreased the victim's HP bar to 0. Meanwhile, a blue bar appeared on top of Slave 1 and decreased by a little. A new icon of water droplet appeared, but it was darkened. The icon represented the cooldown timer of the water bullet skill. Slave 1 needed to wait 5 seconds before he could use it again. Bonk! Slave 1 reached the nearest Knoll and bonked him. Another one perished. Xiao Mao's crossbow was like a machine gun, spraying bolts at the confused elite Knolls. After being hit several times, the first elite Knoll regained his senses. He turned toward Xiao Mao and leaped at him. Exploiting the small stature and light weight, Xiao Mao jumped up with all his strength and latched on the wall, using his 4 back tentacles. His 4 front tentacles aimed the crossbow at the big guy and fired another shot. Poek. The bolt entered the eye and dealt critical damage. Bonk! As if Slave 1 had reacted to the danger of his master, he smashed at the back of the elite Knoll, delivering the finishing blow. Xiao Mao continued hanging on the cave's wall. He sniped the other elite Knoll. Slave 1 turned around and went for the other injured monsters. 2 minutes later, the 2-man party wiped out the first squad of the Knolls. Slave 1's nostrils flared as he was elated by the achievements. Xiao Mao giggled while he poured HP potions on Slave 1's head to heal his wounds. From here on out, the true dungeon raid began. Chapter 32 Cat Dad's Serious Dungeon Raid, 2. After eliminating the first unit, Xiao Mao and Slave 1 went for the second patrol unit. Xiao Mao improved his strategy. Instead of letting Slave 1 jump into the fray head-on, Xiao Mao made a torch and let Slave 1 hold it. As the torch illuminated in the dark, it was easy for patrolling Knoll to spot him. They howled and charged at Slave 1 with their lives depending on it. Slave 1 ran away per Xiao Mao's order. Meanwhile, Xiao Mao latched onto the wall like a Spider-Man. He loaded an explosive bolt on his crossbow and fired at the pursuing Knolls. Xiao Mao didn't fire only one to injure them. He fired 2 bolts consecutively. Explosions scattered dirt and Knolls everywhere. A portion of the ceiling rocks fell down and hit the Knolls' heads. The group of 20 monsters was down to 5, including the elite Knolls. At that moment, Slave 1 turned around and fired water bullets. Xiao Mao also focus fired on the elite monsters and cleaned the mess. The second attempt only took 2 minutes to wipe out the party of 20 Knolls, which was a huge improvement. Slave 1 drank a healing potion, replenishing his health. Then, the 2-man party traveled further in. The cave was a linear passage with patrolling gnolls in each section. And because of its narrowness, Xiao Mao and Slave 1 could take on one unit of patrolling gnoll at a time without getting ambushed. 30 minutes later, they killed 10 parties of patrolling gnolls and 10 elite monsters. Equipment items filled their inventory slots. Yet, they kept heading further inside the cave. After slaughtering 12 groups of gnolls on the first level, the cave became empty. Xiao Mao and Slave 1 reached a stair, leading down toward the second level of the dungeon. Xiao Mao was satisfied with their progress. Currently, he was level 13 while Slave 1's level reached 33. Slave 1 couldn't gain any EXP from killing Dirty Gnoll level 22 anymore. He still gained some EXP share from killing elite gnolls, but they needed to kill 5 of them to raise Slave 1's level by 1. Xiao Mao didn't have enough time to wait for elite gnolls and their minions to respawn. He decided to go further down. Slave 1. Discard all equipment items you get from the monsters here, Munya. They will get in the way if we carry everything, Munya. Xiao Mao and Slave 1 discarded the newly acquired hyene boots and equipment at the corner of the cave. As no gnoll would patrol here, they used this place as an item gathering point. Slave 1 secretly glanced at his system notification messages from his contracted fairy. She urged him to sacrifice 200 max MP to increase her strength by another tier. But Slave 1 chose to postpone the upgrade at the moment. Walking down the stairs, they came across a long corridor with prison rooms on the sides. Nothing was inside the cells but skeletons of humanoid creatures. In front of the corridor, 4 elite gnolls noticed Xiao Mao and Slave 1's arrival. They raised their spears and prepared for battle. Unlike the other elite gnolls, these guys wore half-plate armor and wielded rusty spears. Their red names displayed Warden Gnolls, level 40. Slave 1 took the vanguard role as usual. Xiao Mao fired barbed bolts at all 4 gnolls, hitting their foreheads. 125. Hitting the gnolls to the head couldn't instantly kill them with Xiao Mao's current level and strength. Its HP bar only decreased by 5%. However, the barbed bolts made the gnolls pause and stagger for a moment. The wardens pulled out the barbed bolts from their heads, causing blood to gush out. Howl! As soon as the blood dripped on the floor, the hyena-like howling voice of other gnolls echoed from the depth of the dungeon. Back to the stairs, Munya. The second floor's mobs have a sharp nose for blood. Every monster in a radius of 100 meters will gather here, Munya. Xiao Mao ordered Slave 1 to retreat back and waited for the gnolls by the stairs. Both men retreated back to the staircase. Xiao Mao stood on the higher ground while Slave 1 blocked the narrow passage. Soon, the 4 wardens chased after the party. Behind them, more gnolls with clubs and knives dashed as if they were hunting wolves. Xiao Mao glanced at the crowd, which followed behind the wardens. Gnoll Warrior, level 28. Gnoll Fighter, level 29. Gnoll Hunter, level 30. The mob looked intimidating. But they didn't hold a candle to the giant behind them. Behind the crowd of 50 gnolls, a 3-meter-tall female werewolf followed them. She had no weapon, but she wore full leather armor, leather bracer, and leather pants. Mama Warden was her unique name. She was the roaming floor boss, who protected the second level of the dungeon. The number behind her name, level 40, told Xiao Mao that she wouldn't be an easy game. But Xiao Mao came prepared for this situation. He set his default ammo to explosive bolts and fired at the center of the crowd. Boom! The bolt hit the nose of a gnoll hunter, dealing 140 damage. Then, it exploded, inflicting extra damage to the area. The bomb stunned the mob and stopped their movements. However, the wardens were out of range. They thrust their spears at Slave 1. Slave 1 swung his wok and deflected the strikes, but one of them hit his chest. 150. Slave 1's face was ashen. Even with a high defense and the top leather gears for a level 20 character, the spear still penetrated his leather armor and stabbed into his chest. Xiao Mao also clicked his tongue. Leather armor sets were not suitable for tankers, so it was an obvious outcome. Keep running up the stairs, Munya. Slave 1 let out a sigh of relief. He turned around and ran. While you're running, point your fingers and use your bullets, Munya. Slave 1 was enlightened. While running, he pointed a finger at the nearest warden and fired a water bullet. 154. It worked. The bullet punctured through the nearest warden's chest and forced it to take a step back. But 3 other wardens and the uninjured gnolls bypassed the first warden. They climbed the stairs, chasing after Slave 1 and Xiao Mao. Xiao Mao aimed at the feet of the gnolls and fired another bolt. Boom! The explosion knocked the chasing crowd off the stairs. The falling gnolls collided with the pursuers and hindered their movements. The moment was what Xiao Mao had been aiming for. He fired another explosive round. Boom! Red numbers appeared and they were sent flying randomly. Drink healing potions and get ready to fall back, Munya. Slave 1 nodded and drank the potions that Xiao Mao had given him. While he was at it, he kept firing water bullets at the nearest warden whenever the cooldown time was reset. Boom! Boom! As the gnolls struggled and tried to reach the stairs, they crowded in one spot and became a big target. Xiao Mao's explosive bolts kept disrupting their progress and decreasing their HP. Everything went according to plan. If Xiao Mao could keep this up, the entire group of gnolls would die from the repeated explosions. After bombing the gnolls for 10 seconds, the Mama Warden reached the stair. She took the lead and menacingly walked toward Slave 1 as if she was Mr. X, who was chasing after Leon Kennedy. Boom! The explosive arrow hit her face and exploded. Yet, Mama Warden didn't flinch. Her HP also only decreased by 75. The explosion couldn't stun her. Xiao Mao dryly smiled. It was time to bail. Retreat, Munya. Slave 1 kept running up. Xiao Mao also abandoned the fight and went back to the ground floor. Mama Warden only glared at Xiao Mao and Slave 1, who had left their floor. Then, she grudgingly stared at the invisible barrier, which stopped her and the other gnolls from going upstairs. The surviving gnolls turned around and walked back toward their spawn location as if they were robots. As for elite wardens, they disengaged and returned to their posts. Their HP bars instantly recovered to the fullest. As for Mama Warden, she snorted and turned around, going back to the inner area. However, his expression turned ugly. Nobody knew what she had been thinking, but the pupils in her eyes contained some intelligence. California, LA. Pangu Incorporate held a press conference to satisfy their players and the presses, regarding their game developments and the benefits of the game world. It had been months since the game had officially launched. However, nothing similar to the first series, aka Pangu Online, had once offered. No human had improved their physical strength, experienced age regression, or become smarter. The gamers had been doubting the Pangu Incorporate for a long time that the company was involved in some Illuminati conspiracy, as they kept hiding the perks and the incidents from the first game. Now that the second game had been launched for a while, the gamers and the presses were curious about the unanswered scandals of the previous game. Pan Xian, the CEO of the company, sat at the press con table with 30 microphones, cell phones, and recording mics from unknown journalist organizations. His poker face and faint smile looked natural, as if he had done this a million times before. The CEO had been talking about the AI of the game, which was improved from the previous game. Although the regular monsters still behave robotically for the sake of entertaining casual players, unique monsters, such as named bosses in dungeons, world bosses, event characters, and all NPCs are now operated by our latest AI. Karmic Soul. They can react, learn, adapt, and analyze the player's purposes and behaviors to grow stronger and survive in the game, to add the spice of realism to the game. One of Pan Xian's assistants displayed a clip, which showed a roaming boss monster on a massive continent. Pan Xian pointed the laser pointer and highlighted a certain gigantic crocodile dinosaur, who had been taking a nap while 1,000 fairies planted strange flowers on its back. It was Sir Nun. For example, this is Sir Nun. He's a level 5000 world boss of this archipelago, and obviously, he comes with the karmic soul AI. He doesn't always attack any player. But when he does, oh boy, he is merciless. Pan Xian almost couldn't suppress his smile as he looked at a clip on his laptop, which showed how Slave 1 offered tributes to Sir Nun. But before Pan Xian could continue, one of the journalists raised his hand. He spoke without permission. Sir, with all respects, we're here for the news relating to the side effects of Pangu Online 2. Can you confirm that the second franchise will have similar benefits that the first game of the series had, such as physical enhancement or age regression? The secretary, who had been sitting next to Pan Xian, leaned closer to her mic. She scolded the journalist. Please wait for the Q&A session, sir. We will not answer any question. But the journalist persisted. Many attendees also raised their hands, pencils, and their phones. Mr. Pan Xian. Can Pangu Online 2 cure cancer like how Pangu Online 1 did? Sir. There were reports that a player from Japan couldn't log out from Pangu Online 1 game, and his character and consciousness got stuck in the game for decades until today. Have you discovered the cause of this? Mr. Pan. There were rumors that Susanoo, who died while playing the game a decade ago, has been cited during the beta test period and testified to be trapped in there because of the game system. Do you have any opinion, sir? The journalist bombarded Pan Xian with difficult questions, which all related to the first game that had been shut down years ago. Pan Xian's poker face slightly darkened. He deeply inhaled and thought of excuses. But then, his son, who had come to the conference with him, stood up and answered the questions. My name is Pan Mei. I'm the chief game administrator, and I'm responsible for the debugging of both games. I shall answer your concerns regarding the first game. First off, regarding the famous pro player, Mr. Kiran Susanoo incident, everything was a fabricated joke, created by internet trolls. Mr. Kiran Susanoo's case has been investigated and discovered that the player had a weak heart, and the cause of death was heart disease. The record showed that he died after playing the game for 70 hours consecutively without a wink of sleep or a meal. As for the logout incident, the bugs have been fixed, and the press conference continued as Pan Mei covered the game company's mistakes. Pan Xian leaned back in his chair and sipped some water. He inwardly sighed. You mofo know nothing. Soon, you all will beg me to play the game. I'm your salvation, you fool. Chapter 33 Cat Dad's Slave is a Tank. Siren City. The capital city was the commercial hub of the Yuan Empire. It was located at a strategic point, a kilometer away from the commercial ports. Cargo ships from the western continent picked this place as a logistics center for distribution and trading goods with the Yuan Empire, while the local firms and merchant guild gathered here to export their specialties to the other continents. Because of the maritime transport and the necessities of vessel maintenance, shipbuilders were in high demand. Shipyards popped up like spreading mushrooms, while the military port of the Yuan Empire flourished because of the influx of shipbuilders. At the primary shipyard of Merchant Guild, the chief shipbuilding engineer was an elderly dwarf with ginger hair and a full beard. He sat in his office, crafting a miniature caravel with toothpicks to soothe his boredom. Chip Hai was the unique name of this NPC, who was installed with the unique AI of Pangu. He was a fanatic warship builder, who only cared about constructing large battleships. He used to construct several combat vessels for the Yuan Empire, but the commissions were scarce these days because of the rivaling shipyards of players. Again, Chip Hai was bored. He didn't feel like working as all the commissions were mundane. RRRRRRGGGG. A high-pitched sound of a telegram machine jolted Chip Hai off his seat. He fell off his chair and stumbled to get up. The telegram machine was a round orb with a mouth. It spat out a piece of paper as if it was a modern fax machine. Chip Hai picked the piece of A6 paper and schemed through it. Then, his pupils expanded and brightened. Urgent commission from the seaside town. Build a Kraken hunter within 6 months. The commissioner promised to pay 100 billion gold coins if you finish the ship under this time span. If failed, we get only 50 billion. A down payment of 20 billion GC has been made and transferred to your account. The commissioner seems to know his craft. Be sure not to degrade the ship's quality, or you will ruin our reputation. Chip Ha's hands trembled, but not because of anger. The excitement of a new challenge and the joy of getting another big job gave him goosebumps and the drive to work. Finally, ya boys have a worthy challenge. Chip Ha rushed out to the shipyard workshop and yelled at the shipbuilders and engineers, who had been working on a small transport vessel. Stop what you're doing. Cancel every freaking order you have on your hands. We have a huge one. The dwarf, human, and giant shipbuilders dropped their hammers and tools on their hands. They stared at Chip Ha in astonishment. We're making a galleon-class Kraken hunter within 6 months. The pay is 100 billion gold coins if successful. If we fail, we get only half. Now, move out. A huge commission always impacted the NPCs in the game, especially important NPCs with karmic soul AI. An hour after Chip Ha had received the commission, the news reached the Emperor's ears. Building a commercial vessel was one thing. However, building a warship on the Empire's soil without permission raised the eyebrows of the Emperor and the nobles of the country. Noble NPCs began issuing quests to investigate Xiao Mao's background and his purposes for building the ship. However, they didn't stop the Merchant Guild's shipyard from doing their business, as getting in their ways might offend all merchants in the country. That day, the Imperial Court issued a telegram to seaside towns' Adventurer Guild, Merchant Guild, Labor Guild, and all players' guilds in the vicinity. The Emperor has summoned Xiao Mao to Siren City. Find him. Knoll Dungeon. Xiao Mao and Slave One caught their breath. The fight just now was dangerous because of their number and the roaming floor boss. However, that fight was intentional. Xiao Mao checked the game messages to see how many gnolls they had killed during the chaos. Out of 50 mobs, 17 were dead. The fight lasted only a minute, but they killed 17 of them at once. But that wasn't enough. They needed to go back in there and kill everything. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get to the 3rd level, where the hidden dungeon entrance was hidden. For now, they needed to solve the inventory slot issue first. Toss the equipment items and the unstackable items to that pile, Munya. We'll be going back again. Xiao Mao looked at the pile of discarded equipment that they couldn't keep. The mountain of boots and hyene set was still there. The duo put the newly acquired loot there, except for cards and random japdom. Aside from cards, the gnolls on the 2nd level dropped other parts of the hyene set. They got extra helmets, clubs, and gloves for the trouble. Then, Xiao Mao inspected their statuses to adjust their strategies. Meanwhile, Slave One decided to push his stats to another level. He agreed to sacrifice 200 max MP to the fairy. Ding! Cleansing Water, Mastery 0%. This water element spell was basic healing magic. You can cast it on your ally to heal a small amount of HP. Effect: heal 56 HP. MP usage: 20. Name: Slave One. Race: Human, Evolvable. Job: Fisherman, Evolvable, Novice Water Mage, Evolvable. Unique skill: Fishing Spot Finder, 15%. Racial skill: Normal skills, Water Bullet, 5%, Cleansing Water, 0%. Current order: waiting for instructions. Level: 35/50. EXP: 102,485/280,607. Status attributes: STR, 18. Dex, 18. AGI, 18. VIT, 18. Int, 116. WIS, 118. Allocable status points, 70. Spiritual roots: Fire, 17. Water, 183. Wind, 17. Metal, 17. Wood, 77. Lightning, 17. Darkness, 17. Light, 17. Allocable status points, 70. Combat status. ATK, 9 plus 50. Def, 9 plus 150. M.ATK, 76. M.Def, 59. HP, 380/380, plus 200. MP, 530/830, minus 350. Although the fairy took some of Slave 1's max MP away, he didn't lose out much as the 50 extra WIS attribute granted him 500 max MP in return. Therefore, he gained an additional 150 max MP and magic defense stats as profits. Now that his magic attack was stronger, Slave 1 was confident that he would be more useful in the next fight. Xiao Mao also noticed the proud look of Slave 1. He checked the latter's status to see the progress of his improvement. Upon noticing that the fairy had boosted his stats again, Xiao Mao grinned. Now, you're making me envious. Too bad that I don't have enough time to befriend fairies. Otherwise, I would have seduced a few fairies for myself. A spiritual being, such as a fairy, was helpful for players when they became soul-bound familiar. However, not all of them were sincere and friendly. At a glance, they were useful. They always asked for max MP from the players whom they had made a contract with in exchange for extra status attributes, and the contracted players wouldn't lose out anything. But after level to 50 was the true test. At that point, they began asking for something absurd, such as raising one's attribute to over 1000, increasing a certain spiritual root to a certain amount, giving 1 million gold coins every day, or requesting 90% of the player's max MP and HP for its growth. If players refused or failed to fulfill their requests, they would break off the contract and took back the bonus status attributes along with the max MP of the player, which had been sacrificed to the fairy in early levels. When that happened, the NFT character would become busted. Players would be forced to delete it and recreate a new one as the character would become unplayable. Preventing such a scenario, Xiao Mao had forced Slave 1 to make friends with Sir Nun and the fairies on the mysterious island and never asked for anything in return. This way, Slave 1 got a trustworthy fairy that would never betray him. As Magdalene had a 5-star impression of Slave 1, she would never harm him. On the contrary, after level 50, the supporting character could undergo a transformation, which would benefit both him and the fairy. The fairy increases wood and water spiritual roots for him, so she can definitely teach him that wood element spells. Xiao Mao put 70 points to Slave 1's wood spiritual root and allocated 70 points to int. The spiritual root raised from 77 to 147 while the int changed from 116 to 186. Slave 1's M.ATK instantly jumped from 76 to 125. 2 int increased the M.ATK by 1. Spiritual roots also gave bonuses to the M.ATK after they became higher than 100. By having 2 working spiritual roots, the bonus multiplied. Now, Slave 1 became a unique fisherman mage, which sounded weird. As Xiao Mao admired his supporter's growth, he noticed that a new skill was added to Slave 1's menu. It was a basic earth element spell, Tree Skin. Tree Skin, Mastery 0%. This spell creates hardened tree barks to cover your skin and increase your physical defense. The power of this spell depends on the wood spiritual roots attribute and mastery level. Effect: increase the caster's defense by 33.3 for 1 minute. MP usage: 100. Aha! Here it comes. The OP buff of the century where 200 years of combined devs working experience doesn't mean crap. The spell seemed weak and worthless at a glance. The increase of def wasn't worth the 100 mana cost, and it only lasted a minute per use. However, Xiao Mao had seen its potential in his previous life. This spell was once known as the earliest broken spell among all buffs, as the spell effect scaled with the caster's wood attribute and mastery level. At the master level at 0 to 9.99%, the effect lasted a minute, and the calculation for the total defense bonus was, wood spiritual root value x 10%, plus, int x 10%. But at a higher level, the calculation changed. At the max mastery, the calculation would become, would spiritual root value x 200%, plus, int x 200%, and the spell would last 10 minutes. In short, if Slave 1 trained the skill mastery to 100%, his current 186 int and 147 wood spiritual root would be calculated differently. The spell would increase his def by 666 instead of 33.3. It was OP in the early game. Unfortunately, this spell only affected the caster. Slave 1 couldn't use it on Xiao Mao. "You're a tank now, Munya." Slave 1's dull eyes gazed at his master. He couldn't speak, but he retorted in his mind. He was a fisherman. What is his master trying to make him do? "Now, let's go back in there, Munya. I need to reach level 20 before morning, Munya." Chapter 34 Cat Dad's Spiritual Root Crystal Farm. Xiao Mao and Slave 1 descended to the second level again. As soon as they walked down the stairs, the 4 elite wardens 100 meters away noticed them. They barked and bore fangs, threatening Slave 1 and Xiao Mao. As Xiao Mao was wary of the floor boss, he chose not to use the barbed bolt. He used the rough ammo and focused on one monster at a time. Slave 1 knew what he had to do. He cast the tree skin spell on himself and used another hand to fire a water bullet at the nearest knoll. Pu. The bullet seemed faster and sharper this time. It went through the first warden's chest and leather armor. 353. Additional damage from the M.ATK showed some results. Xiao Mao didn't regret adding all points to Slave 1's int. However, Slave 1 could only shoot one bullet every 5 to 6 seconds. The DPS was on the low side compared to his normal attacks. Xiao Mao followed up. He aimed at the injured knoll's crotch area. Although the warden knoll's upper body was protected by half-plate mail, the lower area was unprotected. The bolt whizzed in the air and pierced the jewel of the first knoll, dealing double critical damage. Then, the explosive bolt did its job. Boom! The explosion dealt another critical damage and knocked the pack of warden gnolls off the ground. They were sent tumbling and rolling because of the blast impact. Just like that, the first warden gnoll went down. It exploded items and everything was automatically collected into Xiao Mao's inventory. Xiao Mao immediately checked if the items that he had been searching for were there. And he wasn't disappointed. Ding! Aside from the hyena set equipment, monster card, and random crafting ingredients, the dead warden gave Xiao Mao 2 red-named items. They were consumable items that Xiao Mao had been looking for. Crystallized wood chi. This little rock is the materialized wood chi. Although it seems shiny like a gemstone, it is more valuable than the regular gems because of its chi. Item type, consumable. Effect, permanently increase wood spiritual root by 1. Ineffective when your wood spiritual root is higher than 50. Xiao Mao smirked. These crystals were the reason why Xiao Mao chose not to increase his spiritual roots with free allocable points. In his previous life, these crystals were more precious than diamonds. Each crystallized chi of every element could be sold for $10 million as investors sought them for their NFT characters. The supply of these crystals was also limited as it was a red-named item. These crystals could only be dropped by elite monsters level 35 or above, and the chance of getting one was less than 0.1%. As a result, every elite monster's spawning point in dungeons was usually monopolized by guilds and real-world organizations. The monopoly became worse after the landlord patch had been applied, as investors could simply buy lands and become nobles. Even monster dungeons were considered private assets. However, Xiao Mao was the only one in this dungeon. All elite monsters on the second level and below belonged to him. Seeing the items, Xiao Mao was motivated. He laughed. Kill! Kill! Kill, Munya! While Xiao Mao was shouting, the three elite monsters had just recovered from the stun. They roared and tried to get closer to Slave 1 and Xiao Mao. Xiao Mao narrowed his eyes as he had an idea. Instead of aiming at their mouth or head, he pointed his crossbow at the crotch of an elite warden. He didn't care if they wore pants or armor leggings now. Poek! Another explosive bolt hit another dangling jewel of the second warden. Double critical. 836. Boom. Double critical. 920. The combo of Nutcracker title's effect and the explosive bolts worked well here. With just one bolt, the second elite gnoll vanished. Moreover, the explosion stunned the two other warden gnolls. They tumbled to the ground and struggled to get up because of the explosion. Slave 1 fired another water bullet at the third gnoll while Xiao Mao sent another one to the fourth warden's nuts. Boom! The fourth warden suffered 2-hit double critical damage and turned into ash. The third warden was also heavily injured. Xiao Mao switched his ammo type to save some explosive bolts. He fired a normal one, aiming at the nuts as usual. Poek! 124. Unfortunately, the shot missed the target. It hit the gnoll's thigh instead. Roar! The surviving gnoll recovered. He kicked the ground and charged toward Xiao Mao. But Slave 1 blocked his path. He raised his wok like a buckler while he raised his club, ready for a counterattack. Seeing Slave 1 in front of him, the gnoll thrust his spear. Dong! The spear hit the wok. Unfortunately, it only changed the spear's trajectory. Puek! The spear slipped through the rough defense stance of Slave 1 and hit the latter's shoulder. 15. The damage was light. Slave 1 faintly smiled as the tree skin spell prevented the spear from biting deeper into his flesh. He swung his club and smashed his opponent's head. The smack hit the gnoll's face, breaking at least 4 teeth. It staggered backward because of the club's attack output. Seeing an opportunity, Slave 1 fired a water bullet into its mouth. Critical hit. 490. The water bullet in its mouth decreased its HP by 30% in one hit. As the gnoll was too close to Slave 1, Xiao Mao couldn't use another AoE attack. He reloaded a regular bolt and fired another one to its head. Poek! Right into its right eye. Its HP was now less than 10% after all the accumulating damages from the AoE explosions and other attacks. The injured gnoll whimpered in pain and pulled the bolt out of its eye. Ding! Crap, Munya! Although Xiao Mao used regular ammo, they sometimes caused bleeding when the monster's health dropped to a certain extent. Because of the bleeding status effect, the gnolls within the dungeon howled. More packs of hyena-like men rushed toward the prison hallway again. But this time, the Mama Warden led the pack and sprinted toward them. She ran on all four as if she was a hunting wolf. Xiao Mao sent an explosive bolt on her way, hitting one of her feet. Boom! The explosion paused Mama Warden for 2 seconds. The fur of her injured foot became charred, and the bolt was still stuck in her flesh. Mama Gnoll bit the bolt and pulled it out. It didn't cause a bleeding effect, and her HP barely decreased. Xiao Mao didn't give up. He concentrated his shots at Mama Gnoll's feet, stopping her from getting closer. As the explosion continued, the mobs behind her got caught in the explosion, and their HP bars gradually decreased. The blasts also stunned some of them, slowing them down. Still, a few gnolls leaped over Mama Warden slipped through the blasts. Get ready to retreat, Munya. Slave 1 slowly retreated up the stairs while he shot back a water bullet to deal random damage to the pursuers. While Xiao Mao was retreating, he fired another explosive bolt randomly at the crowd in front of Mama Warden. However, it hit someone's crotch and exploded. Double critical. 859. And the explosion followed. Boom! Double critical. 986. The explosion caused tremendous injuries to the mobs and the target knoll. It was enough to insta-kill the target and a few monsters nearby. Unfortunately, as Xiao Mao shot at other knolls, the Mama Warden could move. She crouched for a moment and leaped forward. Her leap was so powerful that she jumped over Slave 1 and Xiao Mao. She landed behind them and stood on the stairs. Instantly, she cut off the escape path to the upper floor. Mama Warden didn't move from the spot. She observed Xiao Mao and Slave 1's actions while blocking the exit passage. Then, she looked up to see the barrier between the ground floor and her dungeon floor. Mama Warden narrowed her eyes. Then, she turned toward the two intruders. Awoo! Mama Warden suddenly howled like a wolf. Her voice echoed in the dungeon. Awoo! Responding to her call, the other gnolls deep inside the dungeon also howled. The entire cave trembled, and some ceiling rocks dropped to the ground. Rumble! Beyond the hallway of the prison area, 200 regular gnolls and 20 elite wardens barked and sprinted toward there at their full speed. Now, every monster on this floor was coming this way. Slave 1 stopped retreating while Xiao Mao kept firing at the pursuing mobs behind Slave 1. Xiao Mao clicked his tongue as he had mentally prepared for it. This fight will be troublesome, but I need to do this eventually. I know that all boss monsters can adapt to players' play style, but damn. She's too smart. Chapter 35 Cat Dad's Solo Hunting Strategy. Mama Warden stopped howling and stood there, observing the reaction of Slave 1 and Xiao Mao. Meanwhile, Slave 1's face was ashen as he realized what the Mama Warden had done. He glanced at his master, wondering what he might do in this situation. Xiao Mao ignored the commotion and loaded an explosive bolt on his crossbow. He fired toward the crowd and caused another explosion, dwindling the number of mobs. Change of plans, Munya. Buff yourself and stand between me and that werewolf. If you see an opportunity, go back to the first floor and wait for me. I'm going to solo this floor, Munya. Slave 1 snapped back to his senses. He glared at Mama Warden and raised his weapon. While he was at it, he shot a water bullet at her. Pu. Mama Warden sneered and swatted the water droplet like it was nothing. A small number, 33, appeared over her head, showing that her magic defense was abnormally high. But as Mama Warden was about to charge at Slave 1, a barbed bolt slipped through the joint of her leather armor and stuck into her shoulder. 72. Again, the damage was insignificant. With the staggering 40,000 HP and higher defense than average elite monsters at the same level, Mama Warden simply ignored the damage. Mama Warden only glanced at the bolt. She snapped it, but she didn't pull it out. Xiao Mao clicked his tongue. The monster even paid attention to the bleeding effect of the barged arrowhead and chose not to pull it out like the other gnolls. Roar! More gnolls flocked to the narrow passage of the prison. They barked and fought to get in the hallway first. Fortunately, the entrance passage could only fit 2 gnolls at once. As a result, only 1 or 2 gnolls could enter at a time before they could sprint toward Xiao Mao and Slave 1's current location. While loading another bolt to his crossbow, Xiao Mao opened his inventory menu and ejected a dozen raw meat, which he had obtained from the other gnolls. He tossed them toward the crowd of monsters and fired an explosive bolt at them. Boom! The explosion caused several pieces of raw meat to be slightly cooked and scattered throughout the hallway along with a few gnolls. The medium-rare dog meat released an odd scent. The noses of the gnolls in the room twitched as they sniffed, checking where the delicious scent came from. Xiao Mao added another thing to the mix. He tossed a large tuna toward the group of gnolls. The eyes of the hungry hyenamen became round as they were attracted to the fishy smell. One of them jumped up and caught it with his mouth. But the other gnolls also acted like rabid dogs. They barked and lunged toward the lucky gnoll, fighting for a piece of raw food. The other monsters also swarmed at them, hoping for food as well. Chaos ensued as the gnolls shifted their attention to food and meat nearby. Although it was cannibalism, they ate barely cooked knoll steaks as if they had never eaten anything for ages. Mama Warden furrowed her brows. She stopped moving forward and stared at Xiao Mao with a complex expression on her face. Xiao Mao suddenly turned around and wiggled a large tuna. Then, he tossed it to the ground next to him. As if being offended, Mama Warden barked in anger and lunged at Xiao Mao. Xiao Mao widened his eyes. He jumped to the wall and kicked it, second jumping toward the ceiling. His tentacles latched onto the bumpy rocks and hung his head upside down. The ceiling was 10 meters above the ground. As Xiao Mao's body was light, his strength and the nimbleness as a cat helped him a lot. Boom! Mama Warden missed the target. She looked up, barking at Xiao Mao. Now, go back to the first floor, Munya. As Mama Warden left the stairs, the way toward the exit was clear. Slave 1 ran up the stairs. However, he didn't go up to the ground floor. Instead, he waited at the last platform in front of a transparent curtain of energy, which separated the dungeon floors. Slave 1 turned around and shot a water bullet at the Mama Warden. The bullet hit Mama Warden, but she ignored it. She looked up, glaring at Xiao Mao. Then, she crouched, getting ready to jump and catch the cat. Xiao Mao suddenly thought of Nathan Drake and looked around. Noticing the stalactites, he jumped from the ceiling toward the nearest icicle-shaped rock. At that moment, Mama Warden jumped up. However, as the warden had aimed at Xiao Mao's previous spot, her strong claws hit nothing. She fell back to the ground. Xiao Mao's 4 back tentacles caught the stalactite. His front 4 tentacles adjusted his crossbow and fired a barbed bolt at her. The projectile hit her upper shoulder. Again, Mama Warden snapped the bolt in half, preventing herself from bleeding. She crouched and aimed at Xiao Mao again. Pu! Slave 1 fired another magic bullet at her while she wasn't paying attention to him. Mama Warden glanced at Slave 1 in frustration. She clicked her tongue and looked up, planning to catch Xiao Mao first. But Xiao Mao had disappeared from the previous location. Mama Warden looked around, sniffing and searching for Xiao Mao. But as Mama Warden scanned the ceiling, a dozen tuna dropped from the ceiling as Xiao Mao threw them as decoys. The newly arrived gnolls were instantly attracted to the smell of fish and fought each other for a piece of food. She finally spotted Xiao Mao after she tracked where the fish came from. She found him hanging on one of the stalactites, closer to the entrance passage of the prison hallway. Mama Warden pursued. She leaped over the hungry gnolls and used their heads as a foothold. But then, Xiao Mao fired an explosive round at the gnoll below her. Boom! The explosion knocked and scattered the mobs. The werewolf also stumbled and fell to the crowd of gnolls as her footholds fell to the ground. As Mama Warden fell to the ground, the new-coming robotic gnolls pushed and shoved others, stepping on her and fighting for fish. Before Mama Warden got up, Xiao Mao tossed another small fish toward the crowd and fired another explosive ammo toward the place, where Mama Warden had fallen. Boom! While dealing damages to the mobs, Xiao Mao took his time to deplete her HP. She suffered from the explosion damage while the other normal monsters were injured. Mama Warden tried to get up, but the weight of several gnolls pressed her down. Several of the confused mobs collapsed and fell on top of her body after the explosion, and they struggled to get up by pressing her body down. The werewolf was vexed. She looked up and was about to command her subordinates. But a barbed bolt came out of nowhere and pierced the joint behind her kneecap. Xiao Mao laughed and aimed at the body parts of Mama Warden, which were sticking out of the crowded mob. He patiently switched between explosive and barbed bolt, depending on the opening and opportunity. Mama Warden grumbled and ignored the pain. She shoved the gnoll on top of her and managed to raise her head a bit. But as too many gnolls were packed in the narrow corridor of the prison hallway, one of them kicked the shaft of the bolt, which had recently stuck in between the werewolf's knee joint. As soon as the barbed arrowhead was pulled out by an accident, Xiao Mao received a game notification. Ding! Unlike other games where status effects could wear off by themselves, Pangu Online 2 gave a realistic experience to players and monsters. If any monster and player suffered from a bleeding abnormal status, their HP would slowly decrease, depending on the amount of blood that they had lost, and a bloody clock icon would appear. The clock represented the total blood of the injured player or monster. It pointed at 12 at first, but it continued to tick clockwise whenever the injured player or monster's blood decreased by a certain amount. A deep wound drastically accelerated the speed of the timer, but a shallow wound barely moved the clock. By chance, if the clock's needle made a full circle, the player or the monster with this clock icon over their head would die. In this case, as long as the bleeding effect persisted, Mama Warden would suffer 1 damage every second. However, the crimson clock icon on top of her head didn't move forward as the blood loss from the wound was insignificant. Xiao Mao grinned. He looked for a gap and fired another barbed bolt. This time, he found another opening and fired another shot. It hit the back of her neck, where the leather armor didn't cover. Then, Xiao Mao tossed gnoll meat toward the Mama Warden, attracting more hungry gnolls toward her direction. As Xiao Mao had planned, they packed in front of the prison corridor passageway, stomping on their boss. Then, one of them kicked the bolt's shaft, causing the barbed arrowhead to cut deeper into her flesh. Mama Warden howled in pain. Ding! Bleeding level 1 dealt only 1 damage per second. Level 2 doubled the DPS while level 3 doubled the amount of damage of the previous level. Now, Mama Warden suffered 4 damage every second because of the bleeding. Moreover, the crimson clock's needle ticked clockwise once. 59 more clicks and Mama Warden would bleed out and die. Xiao Mao laughed as he watched the helpless prey below him. He sent another explosive bolt to the crowd, taking him time to grind and decreasing the boss HP. Chapter 36 Cat Dad's Bleeding Tactic. After a minute after the chaotic grinding, Xiao Mao clicked his tongue and frowned, looking at the rain of equipment items that fell from his body. Every time he killed something, random equipment and items were automatically collected into his inventory. However, once it was full, his body always ejected the excess items. Even with the premium backpack expansion, it wasn't enough to store everything. As equipment items fell from the ceiling, they hit the heads of the gnoll mobs, who had been busy eating tunas and meat that Xiao Mao had given them. They looked up in anger. And then, they found Xiao Mao. The monsters barked while they chewed meat and fish in their mouth. But they couldn't attack Xiao Mao as the other gnolls in front of the prison passageway still tried to get inside. Because of the equipment items on the ground, the gnolls kicked and stepped on them like how they stepped on the Mama Warden. Some of them kicked the random items toward the bottom of the stairs, where Slave 1 had been stationing. Slave 1 only glanced at the helmet, leather armor and the other parts of Hyene set equipment, but he returned his attention to the other gnolls in the hallway. He simply stood there and fired water bullets, leeching off the EXP from the kills. Because of the AoE damage and the efficiency of the hunt, Slave 1's level increased to 40 in no time. However, he could no longer gain any EXP from regular mobs here anymore as he was over 10 levels higher than the gnoll warriors. As soon as Slave 1's level reached 40, the fairy reminded him of their deal. Ding! Magdalene wants to absorb some of your mana. In exchange, she will strengthen you. Will you allow Magdalene to use your mana? Note, you will lose 400 max MP if you agree. Slave 1 checked his status. He had 830 max MP, so losing half of it wouldn't hurt much. He readily agreed right away. Ding! Magdalene's engagement ring, character bound, upgradable. This flower ring is handmade by Magdalene, a powerful world tree fairy. She gifted this artifact to Slave 1 as a token of her love. As long as Slave 1 wears this, his magic can become more powerful than mages at the same level. Item type, accessory. Restriction, Slave 1 only. Durability, infinite. Effects, m.atk plus 200, m.def plus 100, int plus 100, wis plus 100. Skill, Summon Magdalene, Automatic. This item cannot be unequipped, sold, traded, or dropped from the character. Slave 1 widened his eyes. His hands trembled in excitement and astonishment. He didn't bother about the detail. He brought out the ring and put it on. As soon as Slave 1 put on the engagement ring, a hand-sized glowing fairy came out of the flower of the ring. She hovered in front of Slave 1 and kissed his lips. Ding! Your familiar contract has been changed. You have officially engaged with Magdalene. Surprised, Slave 1 looked at the small pretty fairy in front of him. Magdalene looked at him with puppy eyes, worrying if she might have offended him. On the contrary, Slave 1 faintly smiled at Magdalene. He gently touched her face with his finger. As if Magdalene could read his mind, she blushed and kissed his lips again. Ding! Slave 1 patted her head with his pinky finger. Then, he gazed at Xiao Mao and the group of gnolls with determination. His pupils brightened and the fire of passion was ignited. He pointed his finger toward the Mama Warden on the ground. Water bullet. A drop of water shot out of Slave 1's finger, but its speed was faster than a 50 caliber modern rifle's bullet. It pierced through a calf of a gnoll, destroying the leg. A big number, 932, appeared over his head. The bullet didn't stop there. It hit Mama Warden's round butt, piercing through her leather pants. The werewolf yipped because of the surprise pain. 548. The damage was huge for low-tier magic. Name, Slave 1. Race, human, evolvable. Relationship, engaged, Magdalene, the World Tree Fairy. Job, fisherman, evolvable, novice water mage, evolvable, novice wood mage, evolvable. Unique skill, fishing spot finder, 15%. Racial skill. Normal skills, water bullet, 8%, cleansing water, 0%, bog trap, 0%, water gathering, 0%. Current order, retreat to the safe zone. Level, 40/50. EXP, 0/316301. Status attributes. STR, 38. Dex, 38. AGI, 38. VIT, 38. Int, 306, plus 100. WIS, 238, plus 100. Allocable status points, 25. Spiritual roots. Fire, 37. Water, 203. Wind, 37. Metal, 37. Wood, 167. Lightning, 37. Darkness, 37. Light, 37. Allocable status points, 25. Combat status. ATK, 68, plus 50. Def, 168, plus 150. M.ATK, 389, plus 200. M.Def, 219, plus 100. HP, 1580/1580, plus 1200. MP, 2630/2630, plus 250. Xiao Mao glanced at Slave 1 and inspected the latter's current status. Upon noticing that the fairy had done something to Slave 1 again, Xiao Mao almost burst into laughter. I told you so, my slave. I'll make you the strongest fisherman in the world. See how OP you are now? I haven't even used my slave training skill on you, yet your raw stats are already stronger than mine. Getting fired up, Xiao Mao gave Slave 1 a new order. Slave 1. Use water gathering and treat the boss as the water source. Treat her blood as water, Munya. Water gathering was a basic water manipulation skill of water mages. They used this spell to gather all vapor and moisture from the environment to create a water bubble in the air. Then, the water mass could be used in a combo with other high-ranked skills, such as water machine gun, corrosive rain, or create water elemental golem. However, the water gathering spell on its own was also one of the deadliest spells in-game if players were creative enough. Normally, the water gathering spell did not affect the blood of monsters or players as it only gathered moisture and water in the environment into a water mass. However, if someone in the area was bleeding and the wound hadn't been closed yet, this spell power would drain the blood from the wounds and collect them to the water bubble as well. In short, any monster or player with a bleeding abnormal status was vulnerable to this spell. Hearing his master's command, Slave 1 put his club away. He pointed his palm at the group of gnolls and cast the spell. The cave trembled. As the water vapor in the air condensed into a water bubble in front of Slave 1. At first, the spell gathered invisible vapor and dried the humid cave. But as Slave 1 collected more water, the condensed water ball began sucking the humidity from the hallway area. Blood on the ground and from the gnolls floated toward the water bubble. Soon, the transparent water ball turned light pink, then reddened. Ding! The trick worked. Mama Warden's bleeding worsened. Now, she lost 16 HP every second. The blood loss clock's needle ticked several times at once and pointed at 3. Now, carry that water mass to the upper floor and throw them in front of the dungeon, Munya. Put all your equipment in your inventory at our temporary stash and come back, Munya. The water gathering spell couldn't last forever as Slave 1 couldn't hold it for too long. But by throwing the water to another place, it would unload a burden on the spellcaster. Then, Slave 1 could come back and drain more fluid from this floor. If this place's humidity level was low, the water gathering spell would become more effective against bleeding monsters. Slave 1 acknowledged the order. He went back to the first level along with the condensed water mass. Now, Xiao Mao was alone with the monsters. He fired another explosive bolt in leisure, not caring if random items would be ejected from him. While he was at it, he threw random equipment items toward the stairs, freeing some of his inventory slots. But as Xiao Mao repeated his action for a long time, Mama Warden understood the trick. She crawled out of the prison hallway and entered one of the small prison cells. Xiao Mao was amazed by the intelligence of the monster. Still, everything was under his calculation. Too late, Munya. You've locked yourself in. Xiao Mao stopped shooting bolts but kept throwing food for the doggies. The gnolls also fought to get more fish to eat, forgetting about the fight and their injuries. Mama Warden managed to get back on her feet. Then, she pushed the other gnolls, trying to get back into the fight. She finally realized her mistake. The hallway was packed with the hungry robotic gnolls, and they blocked the way out. She ended up crawling into a trap herself. Mama Warden howled and tried to command her subordinates to stop, but it didn't work. They were busy pushing, shoving, and snatching food from the ceiling in chaos. As Mama Warden was helpless, Slave 1 returned. He descended the stairs and used the deadliest spell. Water gathering. More water droplets, vapor, and blood of Warden Mama floated toward Slave 1 again. Ding! From 16 per second, the damage jumped to 64 and then 256 per second. Blood gushed out from the werewolf's various wounds like leaking water from a tank. The crimson clock icon ticked forward as if someone had accelerated them. A minute later, after drawing more blood from the boss, the clock's needle completed the round, reaching the number 12. And the Mama Warden fell. Her HP bar, which still had over 50% of her health, instantly dropped to 0 because of the blood loss. Ding! Chapter 37 Cat Dad's New Loot. 30 minutes later. Xiao Mao hopped down from the ceiling after the last gnoll vanished. Hanging on the ceiling for a long time exhausted him. The prison hallway was a mess. Hyena set equipment and regular items flooded the prison hallway, filling the nearby prison cells. Xiao Mao turned to look at Slave 1, who had been collecting items and transporting them to the ground floor. He noticed the fairy, who had been sitting on Slave 1's shoulder. This lucky guy was engaged with a world tree fairy and got OP. It was time for him to play a bigger role. However, if Slave 1 became famous one day, keeping the silly name might be a demerit. Imagine a newspaper headline, Slave soloed world boss. The level of cringeness gave Xiao Mao goosebumps. He thought of the day when he had first created Slave 1. Xiao Mao named him that way because he didn't think highly of the fishing bot. But now, with the mysterious, bloodline skill on him, his potential was infinite. He deserved better treatment. However, a better treatment required money. Xiao Mao opened the game's cash shop and rechecked one of the premium items, which every player had been neglecting. Rename ticket. Normal price 1000 packed. By tiering the ticket, you may rename yourself. However, one character can only use this item once. Please think twice before you rename your character. The one character per one ticket rule was to prevent trolls and toxic players from abusing this item. In many games, strong players used this kind of ticket to hide their identities before they bullied newbies or other players. Many players also used this type of item to blackmail others, causing multiple scandals and dramas. Still, some silly people used this item for fun, but it ruined the game's image. For example, a player once played an elderly character and named himself I thought she was 18. His real-life girlfriend customized her lowly character to have a lewd expression and a big round belly as if she was pregnant. Then, she set her name as I am only 12. As a result, when they played together, everybody looked at them with scorn. And soon, someone took a screenshot and posted it on social media, turning it into a meme. Viral memes of a game always benefited the game's company as new players would jump into the game to replicate the iconic jokes. However, it harmed the developer's ego and the company's reputation. As the Pangu Incorporate CEO didn't want to turn his game into an erotic game or a meme field, the company avoided trolls like plague. For the sake of curbing the freedom of trolling, Pangu Online 2 limited the name change perk to only once per character. In addition, characters with silly names such as the previous example would be instantly banned by the game moderators. And lastly, only the characters that tore the ticket could rename themselves. Had Xiao Mao used it, he would have been forced to rename his character, not Slave 1's name. In this case, he had to give it to Slave 1, and the latter would have the freedom to name himself whatever he wanted. Although the chance was slim, many support characters could be stupid. In Xiao Mao's previous life, many support characters used this ticket and changed their original name into words or a sentence, such as my master's password, 1234, what's this for, at number $%, whatever, or even a more disturbing name, somebody castrates my master, please. The names varied as they reflected on how their master had treated the support characters. 99% of the time, the AI gave these support characters toxic names. Xiao Mao hoped that he would not need to give this ticket to Slave 1. But since he would soon marry a world tree fairy, he deserved a better name. It was the time to gamble. I should have named him properly. Welp, I won't fool around again next time. Lord Exodia, please give me luck. He purchased a ticket. Then, he called Slave 1 over. Come here for a second, Munya. Slave 1 stopped collecting spoils and walked toward the catapus. Xiao Mao handed over the rename ticket. You deserve better treatment and a new name, Munya. Now, you should rename yourself so that your in-laws won't be ashamed or embarrassed by your name, Munya. Slave 1's eyes turned bright. He silently accepted the rename ticket and inspected it. The fairy on his shoulder also flapped her wings, thanking Xiao Mao for the item. But after holding on to it for a while, Slave 1 put it in his inventory. You're not going to change your name, Munya. Xiao Mao was surprised. Slave 1 shook his head and nodded, which confused Xiao Mao. But judging from Slave 1's bright pupils and a faint smile, he seemed to be happy. All right. Take your time to think of your name, Munya. But for now, here's your new job. Help me transport the hyene set here and the mountain of items on the upper floor to the front of the cave. Then, ship them to town, Munya. But instead of transporting them to our warehouse, deposit everything to the public marketplace store for sale and set the price for 1 pact each. You will need to take a few trips back and forth since we have a lot of things to sell, Munya. Slave 1 nodded. He collected set items to his inventory and rushed back to the upper floor. Looking at how enthusiastic Slave 1 was, Xiao Mao laughed. You are OP enough. Now, time for me to reap some profits. He checked his inventory, inspecting what items came out from Mama Warden. G1 Crystallized Wood Chi X5. G1 Crystallized Metal Chi X5. A Vile Werewolf Blood X1. Mama Warden Card X1. Cursed Claw Gauntlet X2. Unidentified Black Stone X1. Unidentified Bronze Statue X1. Aside from the common items and random ingredients, only these items were valuable. Xiao Mao ate all the wood chi and metal chi crystals right away, permanently increasing his spiritual roots. As for the card, he collected them in the encyclopedia album. Now, Xiao Mao had 7 out of 10 types of monsters in this dungeon, not including the dungeon boss, which belonged to another category. He only needed 3 cards of the gnolls that he hadn't met yet, and he would get some bonus stats. The vial of blood was an ingredient to evolve a human race character into a werewolf. Xiao Mao didn't need it, but he could use it on the future support characters or sell it for a lot of gold coins. The black stone was the usual corrupted spirit stone. It was stacked with the other spirit stones that Xiao Mao had obtained from elite gnolls from the first floor and the wardens of this floor. To think that I can find it here. I thought I had to fight the gnoll Warkif for it. The unidentified bronze statue was a bronze model of a mermaid. Although the item detail only displayed it as a white named item, Xiao Mao already knew that it was a key item to open the hidden dungeon. Xiao Mao had never found this item himself. However, from the clues given by other players in the previous life, the hidden dungeon could only be accessed if the players could offer a certain statue to the shrine in front of the boss room. It's a relief that I don't have to fight the dungeon boss for it, but I'll fight him anyway for loot. Anyway, 1 objective down. Next. Xiao Mao checked the blue named gauntlet, which appeared after Mama Warden had died. It came in pair. Cursed Claw Gauntlet, rare. The origin of this claw gauntlet is unknown, but Mama Warden has been using it ever since she has become a warden of this place. Its 4 claws can cut to iron plates like tofu, and it is light, which makes it easy to use for beginners. However, this item is cursed. Upon use, you will not be able to remove it for 72 hours. Equip it at your own risk. Item type, Cursed Weapon. Requirement, Level 20. Effect, ATK plus 200, AGI plus 50. Durability, 500/500. Asterisk, Curse of Hunger. Upon attacking monsters with this gauntlet, your satiety bar will decrease by 1% per attack. Randomly decrease your satiety bar to 0 every day. Chapter 38 Cat Dad is cursed. Cursed items were also a feature in Pangu Online 2. Cursed weaponry and armor usually had low requirements to use, and their bonus attributes and effect were a lot better than items in the same tier. This gauntlet, as well, was one of the cursed items. It had the attack power of the level 40 weapon tier, but its requirement was only level 20. At a glance, cursed items might have the best quality. However, upon equipping a cursed weapon, armor, or accessory, the user would suffer from a random abnormal status effect. Some may poison the player. Some might decrease the player's max HP or MP, and some might even decrease the player's status attributes. The detail of the curses was never disclosed in the item description. The only way to identify the curses was to put the item on. But at the bottom of the item's description, Xiao Mao noticed a line of red texts. Asterisk, Curse of Hunger. Upon attacking monsters with this gauntlet, your satiety bar will decrease by 1% per attack. Randomly decrease your satiety bar to 0 every day. Once again, the mysterious bloodline skill was useful. Last time, it warned Xiao Mao not to trust Otto, aka the Adventurer Guild's branch manager. Now, it showed the hidden detail that was not supposed to show in the item description screen. Xiao Mao burst into laughter, and he put the gauntlet onto one of his front tentacles. By wrapping the wrist strap onto his tentacle arm, the gauntlet let out a howling cry and emitted a dark aura. It also shrank to fit Xiao Mao's tentacle arm. Ding! The cursed claw gauntlet has become one with you. You cannot remove cursed claw gauntlet for 72 hours. You are cursed by the curse of hunger. Every time you attack a monster, you will get hungry. Ding! The curse of hunger has been activated. Your satiety bar has decreased to 0. Your fish gourmet skill has been reset. You can now eat more fish. How convenient, Munya. Instead of getting panicked, Xiao Mao couldn't stop laughing. He put on the other cursed gauntlet to get the double effect. The daily food limit was reset because of the cursed item. Now, he could eat more fish to increase his skill level. Xiao Mao brought out a goldfish from his inventory slot and swallowed it whole. The satiety bar increased by 1%. He gained fish gourmet EXP and protein from fish EXP. Xiao Mao didn't stop there. He brought out random fish from his inventory and leisurely ate everything. The sense of taste of a catopus was strange. Although the game allowed Xiao Mao to taste the food, he felt like he had eaten top-graded sashimi from a renowned chef, and he was never bored of the slimy and gooey fish. Nom nom, Munya. 20 minutes later, Xiao Mao ate fish until his satiety bar reached 100%. His fish gourmet skill also reached the daily cap for today, again. But Xiao Mao couldn't stop laughing. He brought out another cursed gauntlet and put it on the other arm. Ding! The curse of hunger has been activated. Your satiety bar has decreased to 0. Your fish gourmet skill has been reset. You can now eat more fish. Nya ha ha ha. Nom nom, Munya. Slave 1 left the dungeon after he had transported all items to the front of the dungeon to avoid complications. He went back to his ship and sailed it back to the city. A few minutes after Slave 1 had left, monsters on the first level were respawned, and their number doubled. Slave 1 could no longer get back to the second level of the dungeon as Xiao Mao had predicted. Fortunately, all equipment items were stacked in front of the dungeon cave. Slave 1 didn't need to go back in there to bring everything back to town. Meanwhile, Xiao Mao didn't stop eating. He ate over 1,000 fish, and the fish gourmet skill warned him that he couldn't eat any more, for the third time today. Xiao Mao clicked his tongue and inspected the remaining fish in his inventory. Unfortunately, his stock was low. Only less than 1,000 blue rarity fish remained in his inventory. He needed to restock soon. But as Xiao Mao was worried about fish, the game sent him a notification. Ding! Cursed Claw Gauntlet, rare. The origin of this claw gauntlet is unknown, but Mama Warden has been using it ever since she has become a warden of this place. Its 4 claws can cut to iron plates like tofu, and it is light, which makes it easy to use for beginners. However, this item is cursed. Upon use, you will not be able to remove it for 72 hours. Equip it at your own risk. Item type, Cursed Weapon, 90%. Requirement, Level 20. Effect, ATK plus 220, AGI plus 55. Durability, 500/500. Asterisk, Curse of Hunger. Upon attacking monsters with this gauntlet, your satiety bar will decrease by 1% per attack. Randomly decrease your satiety bar to 0 every day. The increase was subtle, but 20 extra ATK was a lot for Xiao Mao, especially when he had 2 items. He gained an additional 40 ATK and 10 AGI for the trouble. Now, Xiao Mao was confident that his damage output was not inferior to Slave 1. Name, Xiao Mao. Rarity, Ultra Rare. Race, Catapus, evolvable. Job, Slave Master, evolvable. Unique skills, enslavement, 0%, slave training, 0%. Racial skills, fish gourmet, 17%, catnap, 2%. Max. Add-on skill, protein from fish, 17%. Title, Nutcracker, unique. Level, 20. EXP, 436,000/1,960,000. Contribution level, 1. Packed weekly income, 1/100. EXP, 10/160,000. Status attributes. STR, 60+30. Dex, 60+30. AGI, 60+140. VIT, 60+30. INT, 60+30. WIS, 60+30. Allocable status points, 500. Spiritual roots. Fire, 1. Water, 1. Wind, 1. Metal, 16. Wood, 16. Lightning, 1. Darkness, 1. Light, 1. Allocable status points, 500. Combat status. ATK, 470+15. Def, 30+15. HP, 900/900. MP, 900/900. Xiao Mao had the urge to allocate all points to boost his attributes, but he held it in. For the sake of maximizing his character attributes, he patiently waited to grind his add-on skill tomorrow. Also, he had another urgent matter. He had been idling on the second floor for too long, and the elite monsters would be RESP-oned soon. Before the elite monsters of the second dungeon floor were RESP-oned, Xiao Mao rushed to the last level of the dungeon. Soon, Xiao Mao reached the stairs to the last level of the Knoll dungeon. He walked down the stairs and carefully checked the interior of this place. The last floor of this dungeon was a hallowed area. In front of the stairs were a mysterious 500-meter-long and 5-meter-width suspension bridge. The bridge looked man-made, but it was currently occupied by an army of gnolls in metal plate armor. Their names and level also seemed intimidating. Gnoll Soldier, level 42. Elite Gnoll Shaman, level 45. Elite Gnoll General, level 50. They were the three gnolls of the dungeon that Xiao Mao hadn't collected their cards yet. The soldiers patrolled the bridge in a formation of 100 per unit, and an elite shaman in a magician robe accompanied them. The general had been camping at the opposite side of the bridge along with 10 lieutenants and 1,000 gnoll soldiers, acting like the floor's boss. As for the number of the monsters on the bridge, they were about 50-100 man units there. In Xiao Mao's previous life, this place was the most famous grinding spot as the gnolls gave rich rewards. The gnoll soldiers usually dropped heavy armor gears, swords, spears, and pikes. The shaman dropped intermediate spell books, mage short staff, and mage's accessories. As for the general, aka, the Gate Guardian, he was famous for level 50 super rare skill books that every NFT character could learn. Although the drops were random, every skill book could be fetched for at least $1 million USD because of their usefulness. Xiao Mao salivated as he stared at the Gnoll General, who had been sitting on the throne in front of the boss room's gate. If my bloodline skill gives me a 100% drop rate, what will that boss give me after it died? Will it drop every skill book that it has? What about the Gnoll mages? How many spell books can I get? Chapter 39 Cad Dad's Road to Evolution, 1 of 7. Xiao Mao smirked and gazed at the 2 cursed claws on his tentacle arms. He felt like a wolverine. But having high attack power was meaningless against an army of elite gnolls. They could heal the gnoll soldiers and used range magic. Therefore, fighting them head-on was not a solution. Okay. That guy should be up there. It's do or die. Xiao Mao rushed to the suspension bridge right away. He hopped on the rail and climbed one of the cables. However, due to the imbalance weight of his body, he hung his head upside down while his 6 tentacles coiled around the cable. Awoo! Awoo! As Xiao Mao got on the bridge, the soldier gnolls howled like Mama Warden, and all 1,000 monsters turned toward him. As if they were zombies in the apocalypse, they barked and rushed toward Xiao Mao. Fortunately, Xiao Mao had predicted this. He kept climbing and avoiding a direct confrontation in the shaman's magic range. The gnolls couldn't follow Xiao Mao or climb the cable. They only looked up and barked while the shaman only glared at him from a distance. Xiao Mao laughed. He took his time and climbed toward the tower on the other side of the bridge. The suspension bridge managed to carry the stone path and the 1,000 gnolls because of the cables, which transferred the tension to the 2 towers. Each tower stood vertically to the ground and stood tall on each side of the cliff. Xiao Mao ignored the tower on his side and slowly made his way toward the other tower, which was located on the other end of the bridge. Woohoo! A cold wind blew from below, slightly shaking the cables and the bridge. The trembling was subtle, but it was enough to make Xiao Mao's tentacles sweat in fright. Easy, easy. Don't look down. Xiao Mao's face was covered in sweat. His fur became sticky and oily while he moved one of his tentacles at a time to move forward. His speed was the same as a sloth. Yet, it was firm and steady. Hours passed by. Xiao Mao reached the top of the 2nd tower. As soon as his tentacle legs carried his body to the tower's rooftop, he collapsed. I'm so exhausted, Munya. Had anybody looked at Xiao Mao now, they would have mistaken him for a liquid cat. Ding! Congratulations! You are the first person to discover the safe zone of Gnoll Dungeon. Xiao Mao struggled to get up. Looking at the notifications, he regained his mental energy. This was the boon of being a pioneer. Every first person who found the only safe zone in a dungeon would get a handsome reward. It's finally here. This is where I will take the greatest risk. The 3rd and the 4th option was out. Xiao Mao had the 100% drop rate perk, so he didn't need those spell books or skill books. He would get them eventually. The first 2 options looked interesting since they could permanently increase his stats by 10 points. But compared to the 5th and 6th options, 10 points of permanent stats didn't mean anything. The 7th option was for the poor. Even though the dungeon vendor's items were expensive, Xiao Mao was confident in his wallet. He came here as a wallet warrior for a reason. The 6th choice was also bad. Slave Master was not a rare class as there were beast tamers, monster tamers, summoners, necromancers, and many jobs that could use helpers. The value of the class was still inferior to the racial upgrade. Therefore, after the process of elimination and value comparison, Xiao Mao picked the 5th choice. Ding! Xiao Mao grumbled as he had expected it. Evolving the ultra-rare race was a pain. Each item's name sounded grand and hard to find. Moreover, some of them didn't seem to exist in this world, such as Karmic Soul Stone, Akashic Memory Card, Ancient Deo Stone, and Entity Crystals. Everything sounded like they related to the future patch, aka the Heavenly Deo patch, when cultivator worlds would be accessible. But Xiao Mao knew that he could acquire the Cathulhu Essence Core easily. He only needed to find the other 6 by abusing the Pioneer rewards. He glanced at the list and picked something that he could use right away. I pick Karma Fish, Munya. An item with the icon of a yin-yang diagram appeared in his inventory. Karma Fish, ultra rare. This black and white fish looks like a yin-yang diagram, but they represent the origin of the universe. They always wander in the river of karma in Heavenly Deo. They cannot be seen with naked eyes or touched. However, only the chosen ones may catch a glimpse of them. Ancient cultivators said seeing a karma fish is an auspicious sign as their luck will soar. Immortal cultivators, mystic beasts, and divine creatures seek karma fish for their evolution. Everywhere the karma fish goes, these people and creatures follow. Please be careful and never disclose to anyone that you have it. Item type: Evolution Material. Effect: by keeping karma fish in your inventory, you will obtain the following effects. Obtain 200% EXP from killing monsters. Obtain 200% skill and spell EXP from using the abilities. Obtain 200% items and gold coins from killing monsters. Your attacks are always critical. Note: you cannot keep this item in your premium backpack, warehouse, or store inventory. This item is guaranteed to drop from your body if you die. If this is not broken, I don't know what is. Evolution materials usually give bonuses and perks to the keepers, especially the materials of the ultra-rare NFT characters. Its bonus was always desirable to every player. However, it came with great risks. This item couldn't be put in the warehouse, premium backpack, or shop, which made it risky to carry it around. Secondly, nobody could hide its existence from the public eyes. Xiao Mao gazed at his name. It changed from white to gold, which hinted to other players that he had precious items on him. This was a game mechanic that kept strong players or main scenario questers in check. Anyone with a main scenario key item or ultra-rare artifacts would suffer from a soft penalty, aka their golden name. Their names would stay highlighted as gold, telling the public that he would spit out at least one valuable artifact once he died. The penalty was basic if one held only an ultra-rare artifact or a key item in their inventory. However, the exposure would be severe if one had at least one legendary artifact. Their location would be announced to the global chat every hour. The penalty was like a death sentence. All players would know the legendary item's whereabouts, and everyone could hunt the artifact owners down for the legendary item. And then, the next lucky hunter would become the hunted, as the cycle of treasure hunting would continue until one of the hunters was strong enough to suppress all pursuers. Although there were plenty of ways to prevent the exposure and the penalty, Xiao Mao was powerless at the moment. He couldn't pick a legendary item as his first artifact, as he would have exposed the dungeon's location and his whereabouts. As Xiao Mao needed all 7 items anyway, he picked an ultra-rare item to be safe. Once he got stronger, he would aim to take advantage of legendary artifacts. I want the other artifacts first, but I need to grind my level ASAP. I'll stick with this one for now. But man, having a golden name sucks. Although Xiao Mao complained, he opened the game option to check the clock. It was 7:40 am. It was already morning. Everything went according to the plan, but it took too much time. It was time to wake up. Chapter 40 Cat Dad is... What? Not now. There are some unfinished businesses to do here. I need to find that NPC first. He raised his head and looked around, searching for a certain NPC. Then, Xiao Mao discovered a wooden signboard, located 10 meters from where he had been resting. The shop is currently closed. Opening time, 9 am to 5 pm. In every dungeon, 1 or 2 traveling vendors lurked around in every hidden safe zone. Some might be wandering in a place that could be easily found. But most of the time, these guys chose a nasty place to set up their stores. There was a reason for their secrecy. After all, their expensive services and items were exceptionally useful in their dungeons, and players called them P2W NPCs. As long as a player could afford 1 or 2 of the NPC's items, that player could easily hunt any mob in the dungeon. In this case, the Knoll Dungeon's traveling vendor had a store on the top of the suspension bridge tower on the boss cliff. The only way to access here was to climb the suspension ropes to the top of the tower. In his previous life, nobody discovered the shop for years. After this place had been swarmed with players, a parkour maniac climbed the suspension ropes for a YouTube content and discovered the vendor by an accident. Then, his location became well known in public. Unfortunately, the shop was closed now. Xiao Mao had to come back here later. Moreover, he needed to wake up and take care of his cats. It was already morning in real life. Xiao Mao's weary tentacle swiped the system screen and pressed the log out button. He had enough for the day, and he would continue the fight in the afternoon. However, as Xiao Mao closed his eyes and waited for his consciousness to return to his body, he received a strange message. Error. Detecting 2 synchronizable characters in your game account. Xiao Mao widened his eyes and stared at the game panel. He closed his eyes, shook his head, and reopened his eyes to recheck it. He wasn't dreaming, unfortunately. Synchronizable characters. 1 Xiao Mao, 22%. Current. 2 Slave 1, 0%. As Xiao Mao had never synced his character and his real body in his previous life, he had never seen this menu before. I heard that rich players have multiple transformations and superpowers. Is this the cause? Is this how those rich bastards got multiple abilities? Xiao Mao was tempted to try importing Slave 1's abilities into his real body. But after seeing that his primary character's synchronization rate had already reached over 20%, he changed his mind. I should max the sync rate of my primary character first before I move on. Also, Slave 1's int is too high. My brain might be fried because of the information overload. He played it safe. Since his real body's evolution path leaned toward the Catopus character, he decided to go on with it until the end. After that, he would assimilate other characters' abilities. Although Xiao Mao had no idea how the synchronization rate increased so fast, he ignored it. Xiao Mao suspected that his father might have given him a modified game capsule instead of a commercial one, and he would ask his father to clarify things later. Ding! I know, Munya. Ding! Xiao Mao closed his eyes. He fell asleep and logged out of the game. RRRRRNNNGGGG. Xiao Mao snapped opened his eyes and looked around in a panic. For a moment there, he dreamed about the moment that he was hit by a truck. Ding! The system notification sound also haunted him. He felt like he was still playing the game. Yoo-ha! Catnap! Even the system's voice echoed in his head. Xiao Mao lightly pinched his cheek to stay awake and snap back to his senses. His heartbeat was so loud that he could hear it by laying his head on the game capsule's pillow. Ugh! Xiao Mao took his time to open the game capsule hatch. He sat up. But for some reason, his head and the area above his buttock were itchy. He looked at the clock. 8:30 am. He actually slept for an extra hour. He was late for school. Despite the urgency, Xiao Mao didn't feel like going to school today. His sluggish lazy legs moved at a snail's speed, dragging his body to the bathroom for a morning bath. While he was at it, he scratched his head. For some reason, his hair seemed softer than usual. The more he scratched, the more he got addicted to the smooth and silky hair. Wait a minute. I might have sweated a lot while I was playing the game. I should take a bath properly. Protecting himself from fungus, germs, and random skin diseases, Xiao Mao washed his hair and took his time soaping the entire body. While he was enjoying the morning shower, the area between his lower back and his buttock grew itchy. Xiao Mao scratched it and his fingers found something bumpy. Hey! Xiao Mao rubbed the thing behind him. So far, it didn't hurt, but it felt good when he scratched it. Was a pimple or a cyst always hairy? And most importantly, it continued to grow longer. It grew longer. By the time Xiao Mao had realized it, the hairy thing was already as long as his hand. Xiao Mao frowned. He grabbed a small mirror in front of the wash basin and turned around. He looked at the mirror, which showed the reflection of the mirror behind him. He pursed his lips. He understood what it was. It was a white furry tail. Xiao Mao turned around and looked at his reflection in the wash basin mirror. His pupils had already turned gold. His skin became so smooth and tender. Meanwhile, the fangs seemed longer and sharper while the surface of his tongue was barbed. Xiao Mao touched the surface of his tongue to feel it. Indeed, it was a cat's tongue. Holy crap, Munya! Xiao Mao's pupils expanded like a cat's eyes. By reflex, his hand grabbed the top of his head and scratched it. Suddenly, 2 areas on top of his head sent a pain signal to his brain. It felt like a layer of skin had been peeled off. But what happened next surprised Xiao Mao. 2 white furry cat ears slowly rose from the top of his head. At the same time, his human ears sunk into his skin and vanished, replacing with his silky medium-long black hair. Xiao Mao widened his eyes. His hair was longer, but it was now black and white, similar to Munyang's fur and his game character's fur. Now, he looked like a hooligan or a delinquent, who had dyed a portion of his front hair white. Ugh! Xiao Mao's tail waved left and right because of his complex emotion, and it accidentally hit the wooden cloth basket behind him. The sharp pain from the tail numbed his spine and his thighs. The pain was as bad as when someone kicked his nuts. He almost collapsed in the bathroom. The long white tail stretched and curled because of the pain. Now, the tail was already a meter long. Had Xiao Mao never gotten his cat ears, he would have thought that the tail was a monkey's tail. Xiao Mao slowly recovered from the random pain all over his body. He sized up his new appearance. Now, he looked like a demi-beastman in Japanese fantasy novels. He closed his eyes to concentrate, but a clear system screen panel appeared behind his eyelids. This time, everything was so clear that Xiao Mao could read everything. Ding! Congratulations! You have transformed for the first time. Oh, boy! Xiao Mao had prepared his heart for it when he picked a catopus as his primary character. But he had never expected a rapid transformation after playing the game for a couple of days. Everything happened too fast. Still, Xiao Mao was optimistic. He coughed and mimicked the hoarse voice of Batman. I'm Catman. Xiao Mao shook his head, discarding the name. He was aware that his naming sense needed work, but he didn't know what kind of superhero alias he should go with in the future. No, definitely not Catman. DC will sue me for it. How about Catopus Man? Cathulhu Man? Or Munya Man, Munya?